Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Our topic this week is going to be child protection. I think child protection is a good example of a current social work discourse, certainly in many global North countries. In our next two videos, we'll be looking at child protection in a global North perspective, the European perspective. But first of all, let's zoom in on this concept of the discourse. What is a discourse? What are social work discourses? So the definition has to be the best place to start. Once again, natter with your partner. What meanings does the term discourse have? What are discourses exactly? The word has a number of different meanings. Discuss with your partner. Pause here. What did you come up with? Of course, I was lazy as always. I looked at my favourite Oxford English Dictionary for definitions, and they know that the noun discourse has three particular meanings. A discourse can be written or spoken communication or debate. In other words, this is a fairly everyday meaning, meaning something like the idea of discussion. Good. And we have various synonyms there: discussion, as I've just mentioned, conversation, talk, dialogue. A second and distinct meaning is that from science, from academia, a formal discussion of a topic in speech or writing. Formal discussion of a topic in speech or writing. Synonyms here are a bit different, kind of academic sounding words: treatise, dissertation, paper, study, thinking of the articles and the book chapters that we read and that we write. As a final meaning, really from linguistics, a connected series of utterances. Utterance is a linguistic word simply describing the things that you say, the sounds coming out of a talking person's mouth. A connected series of utterances, a text or a conversation. Good. I want to hold on to the middle meaning here. The middle meaning is the one I'll be using in the course of these presentations. And it's best for me to illustrate this related to social work. I'm going to give you two examples, which I think are really interesting, of early social work discourses. Have a look. The following slides contain quotes from early social work textbooks. Both can be seen as early practice guides. What discourses do we see in each of these texts? So have a look and see if you can find the discourse, guess the discourse, and a clue. In each case, look at the terminology, look at the language, look at the jargon. I think the jargon often reveals the discourse. Have a look at this. By what means does the worker avoid going into deeper layers of the mind than he is prepared for? A first consideration in using these processes is a diagnostic one. How strong are the forces of repression and suppression in this person? If, as in psychosis, the repressing forces are weak and material that would normally be unconscious is already breaking through, the worker must be extremely careful not to set in motion a process that will accelerate the breakthrough. And the text continues, he can help the psychotic or near psychotic client to understand matters of which he is already aware. Such understanding can sometimes be very helpful in combination with constant effort to strengthen the client's relationship to reality and to bring about greater control of his id impulses. So pause here, discuss that with your partner. Where's this coming from? And don't forget my clue, any words which are particularly interesting here. Well, I'm guessing a number of words will have caught your eye. I mean, we notice at first glance that this text is not gender neutral. We've got the ugly usage of he, which suggests that it's an old-fashioned text written obviously in the last century. Actually, it comes from the middle part of the last century. We notice a number of interesting terms to describe psychological ideas. In particular, we've got words like repression and suppression. Okay, we've got the word unconscious here. And I guess the real big clue comes right at the end with this very bizarre formulation, id impulses. So we've got this Latin word id. The word id is a translation of the word es, it, in German. In fact, this is referring to ideas that come from the German-speaking countries. Have you guessed? If you look at it, you'll notice this is psychoanalytical social work. This is social work using the ideas of Sigmund Freud. Isn't that fascinating? Psychoanalytical social work. We typically call this psychodynamic social work. In this case, psychodynamic social casework, because it's work with one family or one person, one case. The text is from a 1960s book on social work. Casework, a psychosocial therapy by Hollis. The whole book is strongly influenced by psychoanalysis. I just opened the book fairly randomly and came across that particular page. It's very much in the spirit of that book. Is this common today? Nata with your partner, is this common today? And why were such discourses, psychoanalytical social work discourses, why were they so big in the 1950s and the 1960s, particularly in the English-speaking countries? You know, what's going on here? This is weird. Can we explain this? Pause here. Can we explain it? I mean, it's worth noting it's not common today. There are little niches, little individual social work facilities where the workers may use psychoanalytical ideas. But broadly speaking, social work is not especially influenced by psychoanalysis. If you're a social work student, you may never learn about psychoanalysis in your studies. There's other forms of psychological theory which are probably of more gravity to social work training. So in a sense, it is highly uncommon today, but I'd like to stress that 50 years ago or 60 years ago, it was relatively common. There was a big psychodynamic social work scene. It might even have been a kind of dominant theory in Anglo-Saxon social work. Why was it so big in social work in the 1950s and the 1960s? Obviously, psychoanalysis, very much an Austrian science, looking at its early roots. You know, we look at Freud's image there. You know, that's our cliche of psychoanalysis. And it really was, you know, a discipline and an area of human knowledge very much developed in Vienna in that particular culture. Obviously, in the 1930s, they had to leave. The Freud family emigrated. Freud himself moved to Britain. Many Brits carry his name and carry his genes. Indeed, there's a number of famous Freuds in British society. And the same was true in America. And these thinkers were spreading these ideas, and it caught on like wildfire. In every part of society, areas like advertising, for example, were influenced by Freudian ideas. And you'll even pick this up in popular culture. Watch a Hitchcock film, don't be surprised if there's a funny psychoanalytic scene in that film or some weird reference to psychoanalytic theory. So in a sense, it was the fashionable scientific development of the time. You know, the Brits and the Americans were dazzled by these thinkers helping us explain our psyches, and it spilled into our social work because it was simply, you know, the big, exciting, hot topic in medicine there and then. And although the interest was mostly in the Anglo-Saxon countries, many of those books were translated into German. You'll find this book in German in your library, gathering dust in the corner somewhere, I'm sure. Let me give you another example. So the second example, this page is a questionnaire regarding a neglected child, it notes at the top. And it notes right at the beginning, this is not a schedule to be filled out, nor a set of queries to be answered by the social agency's clients. Rather, this questionnaire is designed to help the social worker think about the client in front of them. And the questions we have here, the first 6 are all on the child's father. So I'm guessing this is like a family support child protection question. We've got a child, the child has difficulties. Let's investigate the family. And it starts off by saying, is there any criminal tendency in his family? Any record of drunkenness, chronic dependence, unusual degree of immorality, or physical degeneracy? We're noticing old-fashioned language here. The child's father, were any members of his family insane, feeble-minded, or epileptic? Was he born out of wedlock? Were there elements of neglect or cruelty in his own childhood? Was he a spoiled or an unrestrained child? Again, still thinking of a child's father, was he country or city bred? What was the character of the community in which he was reared? Was he brought up to attend any church? What was his religious education? And the questions go on in the same fashion. What is this? What discourse are we looking at here? Once again, natter with your partner. Well, I'm guessing you will also have noticed how old this text is. A number of the words here really are quite dated. This is an older text. Indeed, this is one of the early old texts. Have you guessed what it is? Again, another clue. This is an early example of social work being systematic, looking at a particular case, at a particular family, in a kind of methodological way. I'm not sure that's the right word. So we're trying to look at it in a systematic way, trying to look at it a little bit like other professionals might look at their work, trying to be systematic and analytic. This is a page taken from Social Diagnosis. I just popped my page on the scanner and scanned it in. Social Diagnosis, May Richmond, 1917, more than 100 years old. It really is the early social work classic. In few books did social work progress as much as a profession. So a seed for future thinkers, this seminal text inspired professionals, workers to see themselves as professionals. You know, we weren't just workers doing our jobs. We were professionals thinking systematically, being analytical, you know, proceeding like a medical professional, maybe in the same kind of way, examining the situations of our clients, working systematically, theory-based, methodically, using social work knowledge. Note too how another medical idea, in this case diagnosis, is entering social work discourses. And both of my examples are Anglo-Saxon social work examples, and this is a fascinating trend in Anglo-Saxon social work. We easily get inspired by medicine. Good. Now, I've given you two examples of social work discourses. We can make the list much, much longer. Just thinking about our area of children and family social work, I can give you a whole range of examples of discourses in social work. Staying with older discourses, going back to, say, the times of Queen Victoria and Germany's foundation, you'd have had discourses around child neglect, cruelty to children, concern about orphans, for example. So that would be, say, an early 20th century discourse. We would have been worried about young people being criminal, so youth offending as the British jargon. And again, that would go back to the Victorian age, you know, to really early years. More recent discourses. For the last couple of generations, from the 1980s onwards, we've been very concerned of children's rights. And of course, you have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of a Child, which we've talked about before in this course, and I'll come back to later. So that's from the 1980s, children's rights. Human rights discourses in social work, very, very big since 1994. The UN kind of kick-started an interest by publishing a key paper there. Very late 20th century, we've been thinking much more about child sex abuse. You know, previously it was a taboo topic. We were unaware of its extent. We're investigating that more now. Child sexual exploitation, again, another 20th century, late 20th century interest. 21st century interests, children in the media, for example. How can the media be harmful and maybe involved in child abuse as well? So a selection of discourses, you know, and as I'm noting here, these discourses tend to arise in a particular period. You know, we become sensitized to an issue, to a problem. We discuss things, we talk about things, we publish things in particular phases. Adding to my list, I could give you some of the approaches in social work. You know, they kind of form discourses themselves. Radical social work was a British movement in the mid-1970s. We had strengths-based approaches, late 1990s, triggered by a particular publication. And we also, this exactly the same time, we had the idea of evidence-based practice. Again, if you want to read more about these, you can pop them into an internet search machine. You'll find really interesting literature. We can even talk about some of the social welfare trends as being kind of social work discourses. Managerialism, I'm going to talk about in next week's video, and austerity in many countries has shaped the delivery of social work services. So there you are, there's a whole bunch of discourses out there. I'm going to be talking about child protection in my next two videos as an example of one of these discourses. As a broad concept, child protection is also an older concern. You know, I mentioned this Victorian concern with child cruelty. Cruelty to children would have been the original formulation to use. We had a national society for the prevention of cruelty to children, and that was founded in Britain in, I think, about 1880s. Again, a Victorian institution. In America, you'd have had that maybe 10 or 15 years earlier. So we've got big national associations that have been working in this area for more than 130 years. So cruelty to children, an earlier concern. In the 1960s, we had a kind of leap in our thinking about child protection questions. Kemp was a pediatrician, a doctor for children. Kemp became aware that some of the injuries that he was seeing were not actually accidental as claimed by the parents. Parents would bring a child into hospital, there would be a broken bone maybe, and Kempt was becoming suspicious, you know, that the parents would explain it with a household accident, or maybe if a child had a fight with a local bully. Kempt was questioning this, and he created the concept of battered child syndrome. So a situation where a parent deliberately or intentionally harms a child. This child has been hit, battered by a parent. So we had a kind of discovery of physical child abuse in the 1960s. And that idea really heightened social workers thinking about this, and it kind of kick-started a process of social work really working with the concept. Today, we have comprehensive child protection services with a high public profile. That's a central part of social work in countries like Germany, Britain, America. You know, so that really has normalized as being a big social work discourse. But it's happened relatively lately, and in particular, the last decades of the 20th century would be a time when it really came to the fore, in part fueled by a media interest in child protection failings. So when social workers got it wrong, when a child who was known to social workers died, the media would report that heavily. Some of the children that died following child protection failings, you know, their names became household names. We saw their photos on the newspapers, on the magazine covers, and that's something I'm going to look at in my last video today. So over the last decade, highly topical in global north states, I was a social work student in the mid-early 2000s, 2004 to 2007. And that's when it really started to become a big question, a big issue in Germany, with law reforms in the year or two to follow. So I was kind of a student when this topic was just coming up. And if you're a German native speaker, it's quite interesting. Go to a library, check out the books on the topic of Kinderschutz. You'll notice many of those books are published in the last 12 years or so. So it really is, you know, something from 2007, 2008 onwards. This is a current concern for the last decade and a bit, so to say. Good, let's come to a close here. In our next videos, we'll be investigating child protection law. Hope you've enjoyed watching. Thanks for your interest, guys.